Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into the sticky, mud-caked world of the women who lived, worked, and trudged their way through the Great War, right down to the unpleasant realities no museum tour ever really covers. You're going to feel the cold squelch of trench mud under your boots, smell the tang of unwashed wool, and if you have a strong enough imagination, maybe even taste the damp air that comes with weeks of rain. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting rose-scented nostalgia. These were years where laundry wasn't just a chore. It was a military operation you usually lost. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere cozy right now, drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see who else is awake with us. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're moving through the trenches, or at least what passes for them here. A ragged network of dirt corridors lined with rotting boards and punctuated with puddles deep enough to swallow your ankles. Somewhere up ahead, a woman's skirt has stiffened so completely with dried mud that it looks like a starched lampshade swaying from her hips. She doesn't seem to notice. She's got a tin pail in one hand, a bundle of laundry in the other, and a determination in her jaw that says this is going to be a losing fight, but one worth attempting anyway. The fabric of her uniform, once khaki, now runs through shades of gray, brown, and a greenish black in spots where the mud never fully washed out. If you're wondering why she doesn't just rinse it in the nearest puddle, you quickly realize that puddle water here is more likely to add new life forms than remove old dirt. Proper laundry means making it to a designated washing spot, which might be miles away. And even then, the odds are high the soaps run out, the buckets are cracked, or the fire for heating water has been commandeered for something more urgent, like boiling potatoes. Historians still argue whether women on the front lines actually managed full uniform washes more than once a month, or whether those diary entries boasting about Clean Clothes Day were more hopeful exaggerations than fact. You follow the skirted figure to a trench-side clearing where 3 other women are already working. One is kneeling by a wash tub, sloshing a skirt around in water so cloudy it looks like weak tea. She pauses, wrings it out, and holds it up to the light. If you can call this gray haze light, then sighs and drops it back in. A second woman sits cross-legged nearby, scraping hardened mud from the hem of her own skirt with the back of a knife, muttering under her breath about half the psalm still clinging to her. You get the sense this isn't entirely hyperbole. The smell of the damp earth is thick enough to taste. A young orderly appears, carrying a basket of uniforms, and sets it down with the grim finality of someone delivering bad news. The pile is a geological record in cloth, each layer a different sediment of filth. You notice the older uniforms near the bottom seem to have achieved a kind of fossilization, their folds holding rigid shapes like pressed flowers, only far less charming. You reach for one, and your fingers recoil slightly. It's still damp from yesterday's rain, and the cold clings to your skin like a warning. You remember someone back at the canteen telling you that early in the war, some women tried sewing extra fabric panels into their skirts to keep mud from soaking up to the knees. The theory was sound enough. Replaceable flaps could be unbuttoned and swapped out. But in practice, the flaps often just absorbed more water, weighed the whole skirt down, and made walking feel like dragging a sack of wet sand. One woman here still has hers attached, and you can see the bottom edge dripping steadily into the soil beneath her feet. A gust of wind brings a sharper scent, not unpleasant exactly, but strange like laundry day and damp would mix together. You turn and spot a uniform jacket hanging from a makeshift line, steam rising from it where it's been boiled over a fire in a dented cauldron. Boiling was the only way to kill lice eggs, though it often left the fabric shrunken and warped. In some cases, buttons melted right off, replaced later by mismatched finds from discarded men's uniforms. One nurse laughs as she points to her own sleeve, where a brass button embossed with a naval anchor now sits beside two plain steel ones. "It's fashion," she says, deadpan. The ground underfoot is a mixture of clay and ash from burned laundry fires, so soft in places that your boots sink an inch before finding purchase. Someone's strung more uniforms on a low rope between two tent poles, and you have to duck to avoid brushing your head against a particularly stiff skirt that could probably serve as body armor in an emergency. The women here move in slow, deliberate motions, not because they're lazy, but because sudden energy is wasted when you know you'll be back here tomorrow, trying again. Every so often, someone produces a miracle cleaning agent from home, usually sent in a parcel from a well-meaning relative. Today, it's a tin of powdered borax, passed around like a rare jewel. One woman sprinkles it into her wash tub with reverence, while another just stirs it into the water with her whole hand, watching little white swirls dissolve into the brown. There's a quiet understanding that the borax won't perform miracles, but the act of using it still feels like a morale boost. It's in these moments that the line between soldier and laundress blurs completely. You're crouched beside a woman who's wringing her skirt with the force of a sailor hauling rope, forearms knotted with effort, boots planted wide in the muck. Her hair's tucked under a scarf, but loose strands are plastered against her cheeks by the damp. She glances over and smirks. You'd think mud was the enemy, not the Germans. Nearby, another voice chimes in to recall the early months of the war, when regulations about uniform condition were still strictly enforced. A single muddy hem could earn you a reprimand, she says, though these days such rules have softened under the sheer futility of keeping clean. She doesn't sound bitter, more resigned, as if acknowledging that everyone's fighting the same losing battle against nature itself. As you watch, a younger volunteer tries to lift a bucket of water from the fire, but the thin metal handle bends spilling a stream onto her skirt. She freezes, then laughs, pointing out that at least now the whole thing's evenly wet. The others chuckle with the kind of humor that comes from shared discomfort, gentle, knowing, and without malice. One woman brings up an ongoing debate among the group, whether it's better to tackle mud while it's still wet or wait until it's dried and brittle. The wet advocates argue it's easier to rinse out, though you risk spreading it deeper into the weave. The dry camp insists you can flake most of it off before washing, though you also risk breaking the threads entirely. No one seems to have a definitive answer, and you suspect historians still argue over this one too. Perhaps in dusty conference halls far removed from the scent of boiled wool, a field crow lands on the laundry line, tilting its head as if inspecting the work. One of the women tosses a breadcrumb from her pocket, and it hops down to snatch it, leaving behind a single black feather that drifts into a washtub. The sight draws a few smiles, a brief, quiet moment that feels lighter than the air around you. By late afternoon, the clearing has transformed into a surreal art installation. Skirts and blouses suspended like flags of surrender, boots lined in a row as though awaiting inspection, pails and brushes scattered like relics of some domestic battle. The mud is still everywhere on hands, under nails, smeared across cheeks where someone's brushed away hair. But the mood is calmer now. The day's main work nearly done. You wander back along the trench path, passing a small mound of discarded rags that were once aprons or cleaning cloths. They've reached the end of their usefulness, though you hear one woman suggest cutting them into strips for bandages. Nothing here goes to waste. Not really. Not when supplies are scarce, and the next delivery might be delayed by days or weeks. As the light fades, the steam from the last boiling pot drifts upward, mingling with the evening mist. Somewhere behind you, laughter rises again, this time over a private joke you don't catch. You glance back once to see the women gathered in a loose circle, trading stories while their laundry hangs in stubborn, lopsided rows. The mud will return tomorrow, of course, maybe worse after another night of rain. But for now, in this small patch of war, they've won enough of a victory to call it a day. You shuffle further down the winding track, and the air grows sharper, as if each breath is filtered through a thin layer of frost. The sound of dripping water follows you now, steady, unhurried, a reminder that the melting ice above you is finding its way into the hollows of the trench. The path widens into a low clearing, its edges framed by wooden boards nailed into place with a resigned sort of craftsmanship. Ahead, you see the washing station, though the term feels generous. It's little more than a few half barrels propped on crates, filled with water so cold it could numb your fingers in seconds. There's a rough canvas sheet hung as a token divider, flapping faintly in the wind, offering as much privacy as a paper napkin might in a hurricane. A woman is already there, her sleeves rolled up, her hands submerged in one of the barrels. The skin on her knuckles is flushed red, standing out like the lines on a map. And every few moments, she pauses to blow warm air onto her fingers before plunging them back in. You notice she isn't alone. Another woman sits on an overturned crate just beyond the canvas, pulling off her boots with a slow, almost meditative patience, preparing herself for the shock of washing in air that feels colder than it has any right to be. The wind slices through even the thick wool layers, but here they are, committed to the ritual. The barrels themselves seem to hold more history than water. Each dent and stain tells you they've been used for everything from scrubbing clothes to rinsing vegetables, sometimes on the same day. A strip of cloth floats in the nearest one, its ends trailing like kelp in the tide. The woman leaning over it notices your gaze and shrugs. "Lost the soap yesterday," she says, as if this explains everything, which, in truth, it does. Soap is precious, and when it's gone, cold water and elbow grease are the only tools left. You think of modern bathrooms and the luxury of warm water pouring from a tap at the turn of a wrist. But here, warmth is a carefully guarded commodity. The fire that could have been used to heat these barrels is instead fueling a cookpot somewhere nearby, its thin steam carrying the faint smell of onion and barley. Food trumps washing, always. It's a calculation so embedded in the daily rhythm that no one even questions it anymore. A soft laugh drifts around the canvas divider. You peek and see a small huddle of women leaning on each other for warmth, teasing one of their own, who's just braved a full face and neck rinse in the frigid water. Her cheeks are flushed a startling crimson, hair dripping down in thin ropes, and she's grinning through chattering teeth. "Better than lice," she says, and no one argues. The mention of lice brings a collective shiver, but not from the cold. The reality of these baths is less about cleanliness and more about small victories. You're not washing away the war. You're just scraping enough of it off to feel human for a little while. Historians still argue whether the morale benefits outweighed the inevitable risk of illness from standing in freezing air half-dressed. Some letters from the period suggest women swore by it, claiming they felt lighter, clearer afterward, while others mention chest infections that lingered for weeks. Privacy, of course, is another battlefield. The canvas sheet is often the only barrier, and it does little to dampen the sounds of laughter, splashing, or the occasional yelp when icy water meets bare skin. You watch as two women turn their backs to each other, performing a delicate dance of undressing and redressing without revealing more than necessary. In the background, boots scrape against the boards. Someone hums an off-key tune, and the smell of wet wool hangs like a curtain. One woman you recognize from earlier, the one scraping mud from her skirt, arrives carrying a dented enamel jug. She tips it into the barrel, and steam rises in a thin curl before dissipating. "Stole it from the cook's kettle," she says with mock pride. The others immediately crowd in, dunking hands, sleeves, even socks into the slightly warmer patch before it disperses. It's the smallest comfort, gone in moments, but it's met with genuine sighs of relief. You settle onto a crate to watch, your breath ghosting out in front of you. cold seems to make every sound sharper. The creak of wood under shifting weight, the faint hiss of water splashing over the sides, the whispered exchanges that blend into the wind. There's no rush here. Each woman moves at a pace dictated by her tolerance for the cold, which varies wildly. One scrubs her arms briskly, lips pressed thin in concentration, while another simply dips her hands and splashes water on her face, calling it good enough. Some have developed small tricks to make the process more bearable. One nurse keeps a small tin of camphor balm in her apron pocket, rubbing it onto her skin before washing to create a faint illusion of warmth. Another swears by wearing her scarf during the entire process, insisting it keeps the shivers at bay, even when her dress is hanging over the barrel's edge. There's a shared understanding that none of this is ideal, but it's what's available, and that's enough. The water itself, once you really look at it, is less clear than you'd hoped. Flecks of dirt, stray threads, even the occasional insect drift lazily in the surface film. The barrels are emptied and refilled when possible, but with resources stretched thin, possible might mean once every few days. You overhear someone mention a plan to use melted snow for the next refill. At least it starts clean, even if it's colder than the barrels now. The suggestion is met with a chorus of groans. Your attention is drawn to a pair of boots neatly placed by the entrance, their toes pointing toward each other, as if in quiet conversation. Their owner stands barefoot on a scrap of burlap, washing her feet with painstaking care. You notice her wince when the water touches the raw skin between her toes, a hint of trench foot beginning its slow work. She doesn't complain, though just keeps washing, drying, and wrapping them in a strip of cloth before slipping back into the boots with a look of determined satisfaction. The light fades gradually here, and with it the willingness to linger in wet clothes. One by one, the women finish their routines, pulling on layers with stiff, practiced motions. The barrel water grows darker, heavier, and by the time the last woman approaches, it looks more like a problem than a solution. She hesitates, dips her fingers in, then sighs and steps away, deciding perhaps that tomorrow will be her turn. By the time you leave the station, the cold has settled into your own bones, a creeping, patient chill that even the thought of a warm drink can't quite shake. Still, there's something oddly soothing about the quiet order of the place, the way everyone knows their role, the way small kindnesses pass between them without fanfare. A borrowed towel here, a shared sliver of soap there. It's not luxury, but it's a fragile thread of normalcy in a world where so much else has unraveled. And as you walk back into the narrow trench, the sound of the barrels lapping faintly behind you, you realize that this small, cold ritual might just be one of the only things keeping you from feeling entirely swallowed by the mud and the noise beyond. You hear them before you see them, soft, rhythmic thuds, and the occasional sharp snap, like someone breaking kindling. The sound leads you into a narrow lane between tents, where smoke curls lazily from a shallow fire pit. Around it, a small group of women are bent over steaming pots, their fingers busy in a business that is somehow both tedious and urgent. One leans back on her heels, pinching something between her nails and holding it to the light. "Got one," she says, and drops the tiny corpse into the fire, where it sizzles faintly before disappearing. The smell of singed wool drifts on the air. Lice patrol has begun. You can tell it's not an official duty, no brass, no orders posted, but rather one of those self-imposed survival measures everyone participates in without question. It starts at dawn most days, before the work of nursing or cooking or message running begins. A few hardy souls take their uniforms and underclothes to the boiling pots, but more often, the inspection happens on the body itself. Women sit in pairs or trios, leaning toward each other in the pale morning light, parting hair with fingers or the tip of a spoon, hunting for tiny moving specks. The tools of the trade vary. Some have combs fine-toothed and cherished like family heirlooms. Others make do with knitting needles, the point of a safety pin, even sharpened twigs. A nurse with a round, open face uses the edge of a butter knife to scrape along a seam, pausing every few seconds to flick her findings into a shallow tin. Next to her, a girl no older than 19 hums a tune while inspecting the cuffs of her friend's shirt, as if turning this grim work into something close to domestic. Historians still argue whether lice were truly unavoidable, or if the most disciplined regiments managed to stay ahead of them. But looking around at the piles of discarded clothing, the dirt floors, the overcrowded bunks, you suspect the debate is more academic than practical. Out here, lice are as common as the mud, and neither can be banished for long. The boiling method is the most celebrated, even if it comes with hazards. A woman hauls a pot of water from the fire, steam rising in ghostly ribbons. She dunks a bundle of socks and undergarments, holding them down with a stick until the water roils. Somewhere deep in the fabric, lice and their eggs are dying, though the victory is short-lived. Within hours, they'll be replaced by newcomers from a neighbor's collar or a shared blanket. The boiling also shortens the life of the clothing, leaving wool warped and cotton thinned to translucence. One woman shakes out a blouse after boiling, and you can see daylight through the elbows. She shrugs. A draft is better than an infestation. There's an unspoken intimacy to the scene. You see women sitting close, knees touching, heads bent over each other's scalps in total concentration. Fingers move gently, searching, plucking, snapping. The occasional exclamation, "Got one," is met with approving murmurs. Someone produces a small bottle of kerosene, dabbing it on the inside seams of a cap, claiming it drives the creatures away. Another swears by rubbing a paste of crushed mint leaves along the hairline. A folk remedy, she says, she learned from her grandmother. Whether it works or not, it smells better than most things here. A sudden gust of wind rattles the tent flaps, carrying with it the faint smell of onions from the field kitchen. It mixes oddly with the sharper scent of soap shavings. One woman has taken to sprinkling grated soap inside her shirt before wearing it, claiming it fools the lice into leaving. She's probably wrong, but the others nod politely, as if respecting any superstition that makes this process feel less miserable. At the edge of the group, a tall woman with neatly braided hair works on her own sleeves, eyes scanning each inch of fabric. You watch her fingers trace over the ridged seams, then pause to pick off a pale dot the size of a pinhead. She crushes it between her nails, wipes her hand on her skirt, and keeps going. There's no flinching here, no disgust, just the steady rhythm of a chore so ingrained it might as well be milking a cow or shelling peas. One story circulates while they work, told by a woman with a voice like gravel and a knack for embellishment. She claims she once boiled her uniform so long that it shrank 2 sizes, forcing her to wear it tight for weeks until her mother sent a replacement. Couldn't lift my arms above my head, she says, grinning. But at least I was clean. The group laughs, the kind of laughter that rolls slowly, born more of recognition than humor. Everyone here has ruined something in the war's name. Children's rhymes have been adapted for lice duty. You hear one now, sung under the breath by a pair of volunteers. 1 for the pot, 2 for the bin, 3 for the fire to keep the heat in. They pluck and drop to the beat, their hands moving faster than the words. It's almost hypnotic, and you find yourself swaying slightly in time. Somewhere nearby, a kettle whistles sharply, and a woman rises to fetch more boiling water. She tips it into a fresh pot, and for a moment, steam fogs the air between you and the others, blurring faces, softening edges. The world looks gentler like this, and you can almost forget that what's cooking in the pot is an entire colony of parasites. One woman leans back, satisfied, and pulls her cap down over newly inspected hair. She stretches her legs toward the fire, letting the warmth soak through her boots. Beside her, another is still at work, her eyes narrowed in concentration as she examines the fold of a collar. She finds something, holds it up to the light, and then tosses it into the flames with a flick. The fire crackles, the smoke curls upward, and somewhere in the mix of scents, wood, wool, soap, skin, there's the faintest trace of victory. But the victory is fleeting. Everyone here knows the lice will return, carried in on the seams of a shared blanket or the cuff of a borrowed coat. The goal isn't to win outright, it's to keep the numbers down, to make the itch bearable, to avoid the fevers and rashes that can spiral into something worse. You realize that in this way, lice patrol is as much about morale as it is about hygiene. It's an act of taking control, however briefly, over a body that the war is constantly trying to claim. The patrol winds down as the sun lifts higher, casting weak light across the camp. Women rise, shake out their skirts, and exchange nods that serve as both farewell and reassurance. You watch them slip back into their routines, some heading toward the kitchens, others to the infirmary, a few back to the trenches. The fire burns lower, the tin of tiny bodies half full and forgotten beside it. You linger a moment longer, staring at the steam rising from the last boiling pot. It twists upward, then vanishes into the air, as transient as the small relief it represents. But here, in this this narrow pocket of time, you've seen something rare, a quiet determination to push back against the creeping, crawling indignities of life at the edge of survival. And even if the war swallows everything else, you suspect it will never quite manage to swallow that. You catch the first hint of it on the breeze before you see her, a faint, sweet note that doesn't belong to mud, smoke, or boiled cabbage. It's floral, almost powdery, and so out of place that you stop walking for a moment just to identify it. Then she appears around the bend of the trench, tall and straight-backed despite the weight of her pack, and you realize the source. She's dabbed perfume on the collar of her jacket, and even in this grimy corner of the world, it carries. The effect is oddly disarming. For a heartbeat, you could almost imagine you were on a peacetime street, passing a stranger on her way to the market. But the moment your eyes catch on the mud up to her knees, the illusion cracks. Perfume, as you quickly learn, is more than vanity here. It's a kind of camouflage. Not for the enemy, of course. They couldn't care less if you smell like lavender or laundry day. This disguise is for the people around you, an attempt to layer something pleasant over the stubborn base notes of sweat, wool, and too many bodies crammed into too little space. It's an old trick, borrowed from the days before regular bathing was common, when even the upper classes relied on scent to mask what couldn't be washed away. You follow her into a wider section of the trench, where two other women are gathered, each with their own glass bottle. One's is a squat, amber thing with a worn paper label, the other's tall and thin, its stopper tied on with string. They take turns, dabbing wrists, necklines, handkerchiefs, giggling like schoolgirls over which one smells less like the latrine. The laughter has a soft, muffled quality, the sound of people who don't often get to indulge in something frivolous. Of course, the truth is that perfume here doesn't really fool anyone. If you've been wearing the same underclothes for a week, no amount of violets or rosewater will erase the sour undertones. The women know this as well as anyone, but the scent isn't really for others, it's for themselves. A reminder that they are more than the mud and the chores and the endless parade of small indignities. A whiff of home, a memory of getting dressed for something other than duty. Historians still argue whether perfume use on the front was more about morale or hygiene. Some point to wartime advertisements encouraging women to stay fresh for the boys, while others suggest it was a quiet act of rebellion, an assertion of femininity in an environment designed to strip it away. Standing here, you think it might be both, or perhaps neither. Maybe it's just a way of holding onto one tiny thing you can control. Woman, a nurse with sharp eyes and a softer voice, shares her strategy. She dabs scent on her scarf, so the smell rises toward her face all day. Another prefers the inside of her gloves, so the warmth of her hands keeps the fragrance alive. A third, clearly a veteran of this little game, recommends rubbing a drop behind the ears, less obvious to others, but a constant for yourself. You imagine the ritual of it in the morning, that deliberate moment in a world where most decisions are made for you. The bottles themselves are as varied as the women who carry them. Some are elegant, survivors of pre-war vanity tables, their glass chipped but intact. Others are crude, recycled medicine vials filled with homemade concoctions, lavender steeped in oil, mint leaves in alcohol. One young volunteer admits her perfume is just a few drops of lemon essence sent from home, but she wears it proudly all the same. In this place, the line between real and improvised is paper thin. A sudden shout from the next trench draws their attention, and the women tuck their bottles away quickly, as though someone might confiscate them. Perfume isn't contraband, but it's not exactly encouraged either. Too much attention to your own comfort can be read as vanity, and vanity is not a quality celebrated here. Still, as the noise fades, they relax again, trading small dabs like currency. You notice, as you linger, how scent changes the way they carry themselves. Shoulders straighten, eyes brighten. Even the tone of their voices lifts a fraction. It's as if the perfume isn't just masking a smell, but creating a kind of invisible shield against the gray weight of the day. You think about how soldiers polish their boots before inspection, knowing the shine won't last an hour in the mud, but finding satisfaction in the act anyway. Maybe this is the same thing. Not everyone approves. An older woman passing through makes a pointed comment about wasting good scent on dirt, and the others exchange wry glances. There's always someone who sees these things as foolish, a distraction from the work. But the perfume wearers just shrug, unbothered. You get the sense they've had this argument before and decided long ago that the extra drop from the bottle is worth whatever side-eye it earns. As the day warms, though warms is a relative term here, the perfume's reach changes. It mingles with the smell of damp uniforms drying in the sun, with the faint tang of metal from the ammunition crates nearby, with the ever-present undertone of earth. It doesn't overpower these things, not really, but it threads through them, a soft counterpoint to the harsher notes. Every time you catch it, you're reminded that someone here chose to be a little less miserable today. One of the women leans against the trench wall, eyes closed, and says her scent reminds her of her mother's garden rows of roses she used to help prune in the summer. Another says her smells like the little bakery in her town, where the baker's wife wore too much powder and something sweet on her wrists. These aren't grand stories, just fragments, but they carry weight. For a moment, you can almost see those places in their minds, warm and far from here. There's a small joke, too, about using perfume as a weapon. If the wind's right, one says, we can stink the Germans out with my aunt's gift. The others laugh, picturing an invisible cloud of violets and bergamot drifting over the wire, confusing the enemy into thinking spring has arrived early. It's absurd, but absurdity has its place here. It keeps the edges from fraying completely. You watch as they pack away the bottles, careful to wrap them in cloth before tucking them into bags or pockets. Glass is precious, and a shattered bottle would be more than a loss of scent. It would be a loss of a small anchor to sanity. One woman pats her coat pocket as if reassuring herself it's still there, and you understand why. As they disperse, the trench feels a little different, though though nothing material has changed. The perfume lingers in the air for a few minutes longer, weaving between the smell of boiled tea and damp wool, until it fades back into the general scent of war. But you know it's still there, clinging to the women who wore it, whispering to them that somewhere beyond the mud and the smoke, roses still bloom and markets still bustle. And maybe, when the wind shifts just right, they can believe it for a little while longer. It's the scratch that gets you first. You don't even have to be wearing it to feel it. Just looking at the pile of wool undergarments stacked on a crate nearby makes the skin on your arms prickle in sympathy. The fabric is thick and slightly matted, the color somewhere between oatmeal and damp cardboard, with a faint smell like an attic left closed all summer. You pick one up, and it's heavier than you expect, stiff in places where repeated washings have shrunk and twisted the weave into something closer to armor than clothing. A woman beside you pulls on her own set, wriggling into it with the resigned air of someone strapping into a harness. She tugs the waistband into place, then immediately starts adjusting it to keep the seams from rubbing the wrong spots. Her expression never changes, but you can see the subtle relief when the worst of the folds are smoothed out. "Better scratch than freeze," she says, and you understand she's not exaggerating. In weather like this, bare skin against cold air would be far more dangerous than a bit of discomfort. Wool was standard issue, durable, insulating, and unfortunately, stubbornly resistant to ever feeling truly clean. Even after a boil wash, it holds on to certain odors with a loyalty you wish it didn't have. There's the lingering trace of sweat, the faint tang of the body powder some women sprinkle inside, and always that musty undertone from long hours spent in damp conditions. You think about modern fabrics and how they wick away moisture here. The wool just drinks it in and keeps it. Historians still argue whether these undergarments were actually designed with women in mind, or if they were simply smaller versions of the men's standard issue. The cut suggests the latter, long in the leg, tight at the cuffs, and with a buttoned flap in the back that's more trouble than it's worth. You hear one nurse muttering about how the flap always gaps at the worst possible moment, letting in a draft. She stitched hers shut entirely and just makes do, saying it's one less thing to worry about. You watch as another woman lays her set out over a low bench, brushing it with a stiff-bristled brush to remove dried mud and whatever else might have found its way into the weave. She pauses to pick off a burr stuck in the cuff, then shakes the whole thing out with a satisfying snap. The sound echoes faintly down the trench, followed by the smell of the wool hitting fresh air for the first time in days. There's an odd sort of craftsmanship to how these garments are maintained. Mended knees and elbows show careful stitching, sometimes in thread that doesn't match, creating a patchwork effect. You see one set with floral cotton patches sewn on the inside. No one will see them while worn, but the woman explains it's softer than the wool and keeps the roughness off her skin. A bit of home, she adds, smiling faintly. Despite their flaws, the woolens are valued. They're warm enough to make the difference between sleeping through a cold night and shivering awake until dawn. Some women wear them day and night, changing only when absolutely necessary, because once you take them off, the air feels twice as cold. It's not uncommon to see a woman tugging the collar of her wool top-up under her chin like a scarf, tucking her hands into the sleeves for extra warmth. A younger volunteer confides that she tried wearing lighter cotton drawers once, thinking it would be more comfortable. She caught a chill within 2 days and ended up in the infirmary for a week. Never again, she says, pulling at the waistband of her current wool set as though it's both a curse and a comfort. It's a sentiment you hear echoed in the background chatter. Discomfort is a small price for survival. Still, the itch is constant. Women develop little rituals to deal with it, scratching briskly before dressing, applying a thin layer of talc to create a barrier, or rubbing the inside seams with a smooth stone to flatten the fibers. One particularly inventive soul has rubbed hers with candle wax in places, swearing it makes the fabric slide instead of scrape. She offers you the candle, its edge worn into a strange, flat curve from use, and you imagine the care that must have gone into discovering this method. Wool has another quirk. It soaks up rain like a sponge and takes forever to dry. A sudden downpour earlier in the week left several women with damp undergarments for days, and you hear complaints about the heavy, sagging weight they take on when wet. Drying them requires either a rare burst of sunshine or space near the fire, and fire space is always contested. One woman says she's resorted to sleeping with her woolens under her blanket at night, letting her own body heat chase out the damp. Smells worse in the morning, she admits, but at least it's dry. Sometimes the sour smell gets so strong that even perfume can't hide it. There's a grim humor to it now. One nurse says she can identify her laundry by scent alone, and the others laugh knowingly. In a place where smells are everywhere, earth, smoke, bodies, it takes something particularly stubborn to stand out, and wool has that distinction. You notice a small pile of discarded sets in the corner of one tent, the fabric worn so thin in places that it's almost lace. These will be salvaged for parts strips for mending stronger garments, ties for bundles, even wadding for padding boots in the winter. Nothing is thrown away without a second life in mind. The women sorting through them handle the pieces with the same practicality they show toward everything else here. Not sentiment, exactly, but a respect for usefulness. One evening, you catch a glimpse of something almost tender, a woman sitting by herself, holding her folded woolens on her lap, as if weighing whether to wear them another night. She runs her hand over the fabric slowly, almost absent-mindedly, then stands and pulls them on. You realize that in their own way, these garments have become companions. They've been there through long marches, cold nights, and brief, rare moments of rest. Scratchy, smelly, imperfect, but loyal. As you move away, you hear someone joke that the war will be won not by weapons, but by whichever side can endure the wool the longest. There's laughter at that, but also a flicker of truth. The daily grind here is made up as much of enduring the small discomforts as it is of surviving the larger dangers. And for all their flaws, those stubborn, scratchy woolens are a part of that endurance, holding in the heat, holding off the cold, and holding on just long enough to see another morning. You wake to the sound of water again, but not the clean, inviting kind that makes you think of rivers or rain on rooftops. This is the slow drip, drip, drip of a roof that never quite holds, followed by the faint squelch of boots moving through the mud outside. The air is damp enough that your hair sticks to your forehead, and when you reach for the basin at the corner of the tent, you find the water inside is cloudy before you've even touched it. Someone used it last night, and no one bothered to change it. Why would they? When water is hauled here by the bucket from somewhere you can't see, and every drop is a small victory. You've been told there's a washing station just down the way, but that could mean 50 yards or half a mile, depending on who's doing the telling. The truth is, most women skip the trip when the weather is bad, which is often. Instead, they do what they can with a small cloth and a quick wipe to the face and hands. You find yourself doing the same, wetting a corner of the rag, rubbing it along your jaw, over your eyes, behind your ears, then drying quickly before the chill sets in. It doesn't feel clean, not really, but it's enough to keep the worst of the grit from building up. Historians still argue whether regular bathing was even possible for most women on the front lines, or if the notion of keeping clean had more to do with appearance than actual hygiene. Accounts differ. Some mention makeshift baths, barrels of tepid water screened by hanging blankets. Others insist that days, or even weeks, would pass without more than a token wash. The conflicting reports might be because conditions varied wildly from one post to another, or because people tend to remember their luckier moments more vividly than the grimmer ones. You wander toward the so-called washing station anyway, curious. The path is narrow and slick, and you pass a line of women with towels draped around their shoulders, chatting while they wait. The station turns out to be nothing more than a few wooden tubs set under an awning, each with a film of soap bubbles clinging to the surface. The smell is sharp, half lie, half whatever scent the soap maker thought might disguise it. Lavender, perhaps, though faintly mixed with smoke and damp wool. One woman is standing barefoot in the mud, working the soap into her hair. She laughs when she catches you watching, saying she's getting the barnacles off before they take root. The water she pours over her head is shockingly cold, and you can see the goosebumps rise on her arms. She doesn't linger, just a quick rinse. Then she's pulling her hair back and wrapping it in a towel before the wind catches her. Nearby, another woman is scrubbing her undergarments against a washboard. The rhythmic squeak of wet wool on ridged metal making your teeth clench. The water in her tub is already the color of weak tea, but she keeps going, determined to get at least some of the mud out. She says it's a losing battle. Wool never really looks clean after the first month in service. But if it smells less like a sheep pen, I'll count it as a win. You realize quickly that privacy is a luxury no one here expects. Washing is done in full view of anyone who happens to be passing, though modesty is maintained by skillful draping of towels and garments. The art lies in revealing just enough to get clean without exposing more than necessary. And there's a quiet camaraderie in the way women turn their backs at the right moments, shield one another from view, or pretend to be deeply engrossed in scrubbing when someone else needs a moment. You think about modern hot showers and how easy it is to take them for granted. Here, the very idea of steaming water pouring from a tap feels like a fairy tale. Heat, when it's available at all, comes from a kettle laboriously boiled over a small stove, and even then, it's usually rationed for tea or cooking. To waste it on a bath would be unthinkable, unless, of course, you're nursing an injury, in which case a little extra warmth might be granted under the guise of medical necessity. One of the older nurses tells you about dry baths, rubbing down with a rough cloth dusted in powder to absorb sweat and leave a vaguely fresh scent. It works, she claims, though you suspect it's more about morale than cleanliness. Another method involves wiping down with vinegar water, which has the benefit of killing some bacteria, but leaves you smelling like a pickle barrel. A few women even swear by using stale beer for the same purpose, though you suspect they're half joking. The scarcity of water means laundry is often done in stages. One day, the underthings. Another day, the outer layers. Socks whenever possible, because nothing makes you more miserable than damp, dirty socks. You see lines strung between tent poles, garments flapping weakly in the breeze, some so stiff from repeated washing and drying in cold air that they could almost stand up on their own. There's also a distinct hierarchy to cleanliness here. Those stationed closer to supply routes get more frequent access to fresh water and soap, and it shows in the brighter whites and softer fabrics they wear. Farther out, you find the women with clothing permanently tinted by the earth they live on: brownish skirts, grayed blouses, stockings patched with mismatched yarn. No one says it outright, but the more worn and discolored your clothes, the more likely you are to be judged as having gone to seed. Even if you're working twice as hard as someone in cleaner gear. One day, you watch a young volunteer trying to wash her hair in a tin bowl, splashing water onto the ground as she goes. She laughs at the futility of it, saying she'll probably end up dirtier than when she started. Still, she works methodically, combing through with fingers slick with soap, rinsing as best she can. When she's done, she shakes her head like a dog, sending droplets in every direction. And you can see the pride in her face, small as it is. The act of washing feels like reclaiming a bit of herself from the mud and the monotony. Even so, there are days when no one bothers. Rain turns the ground to sludge. Wind makes any attempt at drying impossible, and the thought of peeling off layers in such cold feels more like punishment than refreshment. On those days, people hunch deeper into their coats and scarves, telling themselves they'll wash tomorrow. Tomorrow, of course, often turns into next week. You can't help but think about the strange balance here between the instinct to stay clean and the reality that survival sometimes means letting that go. Dirt becomes part of you, woven into your hair, settling under your nails, clinging to the creases of your skin. And after a while, you stop noticing until you catch a whiff of yourself and realize you've crossed some invisible threshold. That's when the bucket and rag come out, no matter how cold the air, because even here, there's a limit to what you can live with. You find yourself standing near the cooking area now, though calling it a kitchen would be too generous. It's little more than a patch of muddy ground with a few battered pots hanging from hooks, and a fire pit where the smoke rises reluctantly in the damp air. The smell is a strange mixture, half comforting warmth from the wood fire, half something sour that makes you think twice about getting closer. You're not even sure if the pot simmering over the flames holds food or laundry, and no one seems in a hurry to clarify. The woman tending the pot is wearing an apron so stained it's impossible to tell what color it once was. She stirs lazily, using a wooden spoon worn smooth from years of use, then leans over to sniff. Her expression doesn't change, which you decide could mean one of two things. Either it smells fine, or she's lost the ability to tell. You remember hearing that in the trenches, and sometimes in the camps, smell was one of the first senses to give up, numbed by weeks of exposure to a stew of odors that would have you running for the door back home. Food and hygiene rarely went hand in hand here. With limited space, cooking and waste disposal often shared the same general area. You see it for yourself when you notice the refuse pit just a few steps away from the fire. Flies don't seem to care about the division of labor. They move freely between the two, and everyone seems to accept it as part of daily life. Historians still argue whether this casual proximity was a matter of ignorance, necessity, or simply resignation. There were official guidelines about separating food preparation from waste, but rules tend to dissolve when the rain is blowing sideways, and you're just trying to get something warm into your stomach before the next round of work. As you linger, a nurse with a thick scarf wrapped around her head tells you about field kitchens that traveled with some units, metal contraptions on wheels that could, in theory, keep food cleaner. But those were rare luxuries, and more often than not, women improvised with whatever they had. Sometimes that meant boiling everything in the same pot: meat, vegetables, and yesterday's leftovers, until it all took on the same brownish-gray color. She chuckles, saying the flavor improved with each reheating, though you suspect she's joking to hide the reality that there was rarely a choice. You watch another woman ladle something thick and steaming into a dented tin bowl. She dips her spoon in for a taste, blows on it gently, and shrugs before handing it off. A quick glance inside reveals what might be potatoes, or perhaps turnips, alongside small shreds of meat that could belong to any number of animals. The broth is cloudy, and the surface glistens with a thin layer of fat. She tells you it's better to eat while it's hot, because once it cools, the fat solidifies, and the whole thing becomes a challenge to swallow. Nearby, a few women are gathered around a second fire, roasting bread on sticks. The bread is dense and misshapen, more brick than loaf, but the smell is heavenly compared to the sour tang drifting from the main pot. You notice their hands, nails rimmed with black, skin cracked from the cold, and constant exposure to smoke and grease. No one here wears gloves for cooking. Too much fabric gets in the way of handling pots and pans over open flames. The result is a kind of permanent seasoning on the fingers, smoke, ash, and whatever's been chopped or stirred in the last few hours. You ask, half serious, whether anyone washes their hands before cooking. This draws a laugh so hearty it startles you. Soap is precious, they explain, and if you used it every time you cooked, you'd run out before the week was over. Most people do a quick rinse in whatever water is handy, though that might be the same bucket someone used to wash socks earlier. It's all about priorities, and here, cleanliness is often trumped by efficiency and survival. There's a story going around about a young volunteer who once insisted on boiling water for hand washing before every meal prep. She kept it up for 3 days before the rest of the group told her to stop wasting fuel. Now, she laughs about it herself, claiming she's built up an immunity to everything short of the plague. One of the more unusual sights is the way scraps are handled. Back home, you might scrape your plate into the bin and forget about it. Here, scraps are currency. Anything remotely edible gets saved: potato peels, carrot tops, bits of bread gone stale. Some are fed to chickens if you're lucky enough to have them nearby. Others are boiled down into thin soup for the next day. There's no such thing as a clean kitchen by modern standards, but there's also no waste, and that's its own kind of discipline. As you stand watching, a small group of women begins preparing what they call a victory pudding, a mixture of breadcrumbs, dried fruit, and whatever sweetener they can find. They mix it all in a single bowl, passing it from hand to hand, each woman adding something from her own stash. You notice the spoons going in and out of mouths before being plunged back into the bowl, and no one bats an eye. This is how food is shared here, openly, generously, without concern for the invisible germs you've been taught to fear. It feels almost intimate, in a way that makes you forget, for a moment, how far from home you are. Every so often, the conversation drifts to tales of what people used to eat before the war: soft, white bread, fresh milk, fruit so ripe it dripped juice down your chin. These memories seem to hang in the air for a moment before dissolving back into the steam rising from the pot. Someone makes a joke about how the current stew is probably older than half the recruits, and the laughter ripples around the group, lightening the mood. You can't help but think about how food, even in its most questionable form, becomes a kind of glue here. It gathers people together, gives them something to do with their hands and their voices, and provides a momentary escape from the cold and the constant reminder of where they are. The smell of smoke clings to your clothes as you step away, and you realize it will follow you for days, maybe longer. In this place, smells don't just linger, they become part of you, stitched into your hair, your skin, your memories. The kitchen fades behind you as you move toward the tents again, but you can still hear the muffled chatter and the soft clink of spoons against tin bowls. You picture the women settling down with their meals, warming their hands on the sides of the bowls, and for a moment, the whole place feels less harsh. You know the warmth will fade quickly, but for now, it's enough. You wander past the cooking fires and deeper into the camp, drawn by a sour, almost metallic scent that's different from the smoky haze you've grown accustomed to. It leads you toward a line of makeshift tubs, some wooden, some metal, all dented and scarred from heavy use. A few are filled with water that looks deceptively clear, while others have a faint gray film floating on top, the telltale sign of soap that's been reused far past its prime. This is the laundry area, though laundry feels like a generous word for what's happening here. Women kneel or squat beside the tubs, their skirts bunched up and pinned at the waist, revealing petticoats in various shades of wear. The air is damp and cold, and you can see their breath when they laugh or shout over the noise of sloshing water. They scrub garments with a kind of practiced indifference, knuckles raw and pink from the friction. Every so often, one of them stops to wring out a shirt or a pair of stockings, twisting until the water streams down in little rivulets, then slapping the fabric onto a rope strung between two posts. The rope sags under the weight, and the garments hang like limp flags in the still air. Smell is complex. You catch the faint bite of lye from the soap, mixed with damp wool and the unmistakable tang of mildew. And there's another note in the mix, something sour and earthy, which you eventually trace back to a pile of laundry that hasn't been washed yet. It's sitting in a heap beside one of the tubs, and the longer it's left there, the more it announces itself. One of the women notices your grimace and grins. "You should have been here last week," she says. "It rained for days, and nothing dried. Smelled like a sheep died in our tent." You learn quickly that washing clothes here is more about damage control than cleanliness. There's no illusion that garments will come out fresh and spotless. The goal is to make them slightly less grimy, to rinse away the worst of the mud, sweat, and lice before putting them back on. Some women even wash clothes while still wearing them, standing in shallow water and scrubbing at their sleeves or hems with a cloth, because removing them entirely would mean shivering for hours. Historians still argue whether this practice was common out of necessity or simply a way to save time. But the end result was the same: clothing that was never truly clean, only less dirty than before. A nurse passing by tells you that in some places, laundry soap was so scarce they used sand or ash as a scrub. The grit would work the dirt loose, though it also thinned the fabric until it tore. She points to her own skirt, which has been mended so many times it's more patch than original cloth. "Better to have holes than fleas," she says, though you're not entirely sure that's true. You notice a separate tub where undergarments are soaking in water that's gone cloudy and pale brown. These are the delicates, though the word feels ironic when you see the coarse cotton bloomers and heavy wool stockings. Women glance at them with mild embarrassment, but not enough to hide them. Privacy here is a rare and impractical luxury. If your only spare set of underwear is hanging on the line, everyone's going to see it. After a while, no one cares. There's a rhythm to the laundry process: scrub, rinse, wring, hang, that almost lulls you into thinking it's peaceful work. But then, you remember that each item of clothing represents hours of labor, both in wearing it through mud and rain, and in keeping it functional for as long as possible. Clothing had to last months, sometimes years, and women became experts at darning socks, patching tears, and reinforcing seams. You pass by a woman stitching the seat of a pair of trousers with thread pulled from an old hem, her fingers moving with a speed and precision that could put a professional tailor to shame. Every so often, you hear snippets of conversation drifting over the splash of water. They talk about home, about food, about the weather, always the weather. They complain about the icy wind, the relentless damp, the way the air feels heavy in their lungs. And sometimes they share stories of laundry disasters. The time someone accidentally boiled a wool skirt until it shrank to half its size, or the day a careless rinse upstream sent socks floating away like tiny gray boats. You're told about an improvised drying method used when it's too wet outside: hanging clothes over the cooking fire inside a tent. It works, but at a price. The garments end up smelling like smoke for weeks, and sometimes they pick up an oily film from the food bubbling nearby. You remember the stew you saw earlier and try not to picture a pair of trousers hovering over it like some ghastly seasoning. The most surprising detail is how much laundry water gets reused. Once the first load is done, the same tub might serve for another round, and then another. By the end, the water is a murky brew of soap, residue, dirt, and whatever came off the garments. You imagine modern germ theories would have a lot to say about this, but here, it's just practicality. Fuel for boiling fresh water is too precious to waste, and if the clothes look better than they did before, the job is considered done. A fringe habit you overhear about, though no one here admits to doing it, is dry cleaning clothes by brushing them with bread. The idea is to use a stale crust to rub away surface dirt and grease. It sounds absurd, but one of the older women swears her grandmother used the method long before the war, claiming it saved water. You make a mental note to never eat bread from her pantry. At some point, a gust of wind comes through, rattling the laundry line and sending drops of cold water flicking against your face. The women scramble to secure the clothes before they're blown away. You help pin a heavy wool coat back onto the rope, your fingers stiff and clumsy in the chill. The coat smells faintly of smoke, soap, and something human: skin and sweat and time. You realize that here, clothing is as much a record of a person's life as it is a necessity. When the work is finally done for the day, the women gather the damp garments that couldn't fit on the line and drape them over their arms. They'll finish drying them inside the tents, laying them near the stove, or tucking them under blankets to use body heat. The idea of sleeping with your laundry might sound unpleasant, but here it's normal. The warmth keeps mold at bay, and there's something oddly comforting about knowing your one clean shirt is close at hand. You watch them walk away, skirts brushing against the muddy ground, the air still heavy with the mingled scents of soap, wool, and wet earth. The tubs sit empty now, the water inside cooling and settling into stillness, the surface reflecting the dull gray sky. For a brief moment, you think about how this scene, mundane, repetitive, faintly unpleasant, might be the quiet heart of the whole camp. In a place where so much is unpredictable, laundry is a small, stubborn ritual. It's not glamorous. It's not clean in the way you're used to, but it's survival, woven into every thread. You wake the next morning to the sound of scraping metal and muffled voices outside. The air in the tent is cold enough to make you hesitate before moving, but the activity beyond the canvas pulls you up. When you step outside, you find a group of women crouched over a pair of large metal tubs, their breath rising in pale clouds. This is the delousing station, and the day's work has begun early. The tubs are filled with water that's been heated over a small, smoky fire, just warm enough to be bearable. Beside them sits a bucket of powder. Some say it's carbolic, others call it blue powder, and a few admit they're not entirely sure what's in it, only that it stings if it gets in your eyes. Clothes are tossed into the first tub, swirled, and then transferred into the second, where the powder is sprinkled in. The smell is sharp and medicinal, the kind that burns faintly at the back of your throat. One woman sits on a stool with her hair unpinned, head bent forward, as another combs through the strands with a fine-toothed metal comb. Every few passes, the comb is dipped into a basin of water, and you can see the tiny shapes drifting away, lice and nits, drowned before they can crawl back. The process is slow, methodical, and oddly intimate. Conversations drift between the pairs, complaints about the cold, gossip about someone's missing boots, and whispered worries about who's been coughing at night. You're told that lice are so common here that no one bothers pretending they don't have them. Delousing isn't about eliminating the pests entirely. It's about keeping their numbers low enough to avoid the fever that sometimes follows. You can tell when someone's been skipping, a woman says as she shakes out a blanket. They start scratching in their sleep, loud enough to wake the tent. A small pile of blankets lies nearby, waiting for their turn. Each is thick and rough, more gray than any original color they once had, and when shaken, they release a faint cloud of dust that might be dirt, might be dried skin, or might be something you don't want to think about too closely. One blanket has been patched so many times that the patches overlap. A crazy quilt of mismatched fabrics. You run your hand over it and feel the ridges where different materials meet. Some softer, some scratchier, all holding the ghost of their former owners. Delousing extends to boots as well. You watch as a pair is turned upside down and beaten together over a flat rock, sending out a rain of grit and the occasional dark speck that scurries away. The woman doing the work shrugs when you raise an eyebrow. They live in the seams, she says. You can't get them all out, but you can make them miserable enough to move along. She pours a splash of powder into each boot before setting them near the fire, the leather steaming slightly in the cold. Hair care is its own battle. Combs are scarce and shared between several women, so they're boiled when possible, though not always thoroughly. Hair is often braided tightly to keep it from tangling or providing too much cover for lice. You see one woman winding a length of ribbon around her braid, not for decoration, but to keep stray hairs tucked in. She tells you she hasn't cut her hair in years, but she's thought about it every winter. Short hair is easier to clean, but it offers less warmth under a scarf. Between tasks, some women check their seams, literally. They run their fingers along the stitches of their collars and cuffs, feeling for the small, hard bumps where lice eggs cling to the threads. When they find them, they pinch them free or scrape them off with a fingernail. It's a tedious, slightly nauseating job, but here it's as normal as tying your shoes. You're surprised to see that some of the women still take pride in their appearance, despite the circumstances. One pulls a small tin from her pocket and dabs perfume onto her wrists, the sweet floral scent momentarily cutting through the harsher smells of the delousing station. Another uses a scrap of mirror to check that her scarf is tied neatly. These small acts seem less about vanity than about asserting some control over the body when so much else is dictated by the environment. When the work slows, you're invited to join them for tea. The water is hot, but faintly tastes of the metal pot it's been boiled in. The tea itself is weak, more tinted water than anything else, but it's warm, and the heat seeps into your hands as you hold the cup. Conversation turns to the changing weather and how it affects the delousing process. In warmer months, it's easier to do outside, with water heated in the sun and garments dried quickly. In winter, everything takes longer, and the damp cold encourages the pests to seek the warmth of skin and seams. Someone mentions trench fever in a low voice, and the group falls briefly silent. They all know the signs: fever, aches, a rash that spreads along the body. They've seen people sent away to the hospital tent and not return. There's no cure except time and luck, and prevention is only as good as the last delousing session. After tea, the women return to work, but the pace is slower now, the morning energy spent. The tubs are darker, the water inside clouded and flecked with debris. You can see strands of hair floating just under the surface, and the smell of the powder is weaker, masked by the musty scent of wet wool and cotton. Still, they keep going, because even imperfect delousing is better than none at all. A younger woman, barely out of her teens, pulls out a shirt with a sigh. The fabric is thin at the elbows, the threads pale and frayed. She shows you where the stitching has begun to unravel and says she'll have to sew it tonight, after the shirt has dried. She doesn't complain about the work, only about the fact that she'll have to wear the shirt again tomorrow, knowing it will be dirty before the day is out. By midday, the station is quieter. Finished garments hang from lines strung between trees, steam rising faintly in the cold. Boots are lined up near the fire, their shapes stiff and awkward. The women begin to pack away the tubs and powder, covering the supplies with a tarpaulin to keep them dry. The day's work is over, but the cycle will start again soon enough. Lice don't wait for a schedule. You walk away from the station with the smell of the powder still clinging to your clothes, a faint sting lingering in your nose. Behind you, the women are already drifting back to their other duties, cooking, tending to the sick, mending uniforms. The delousing is just one chore among many, but it's the one that might keep them alive. In this place, that's reason enough to keep at it. You wander further from the delousing station, the faint haze of powder still in your lungs, and find yourself drawn toward the mess area. It's not mealtime yet, but there's always some kind of activity here, a pot simmering, a bucket being scrubbed, someone poking half-heartedly at a fire that refuses to burn evenly. The air is thick with a smell you can't quite place at first. Something earthy, something sour, and definitely something that's been reheated more times than any food should be. A small group of women sits on overturned crates, peeling potatoes with the weary precision of people who have done this 1,000 times. The potatoes themselves are in various states of decay, some firm and starchy, others soft enough to bend under pressure. The bad spots are cut away and dropped into a separate pail, destined for the compost heap, or more likely, to be boiled down for animal feed. Here, waste isn't an option, even when the idea of eating what remains makes your stomach shift uncomfortably. Nearby, a massive pot sits over the fire, filled with what someone cheerfully refers to as trench stew. It's a catch-all term for whatever can be thrown together, scraps of meat, or something pretending to be meat, root vegetables, stale bread crumbled in for thickness, and plenty of salt to hide the taste of anything suspect. You watch as a woman stirs the pot with a ladle so long it could double as a walking stick, her wrist making slow circles. Every few moments, she pauses to skim something from the surface, bits of fat, the odd, unidentifiable lump, and flick it away into the mud. The utensils here have clearly seen better days. Spoons are bent, bowls are chipped, and mugs come in mismatched shapes and colors, often scavenged from abandoned homes or bought off passing traders. You notice one mug still has a faded floral pattern, the kind you'd expect to see in a grandmother's kitchen, now stained with years of tea and something darker. Another woman drinks from a tin cup, so dented it wobbles on the table, spilling drops every time it's set down. No one seems to mind. Hygiene, when it comes to food preparation, is more about keeping the worst at bay than meeting any real standard. The knives are wiped on aprons, hands rinsed in a bucket that's cloudy after the first wash. The water for cooking is drawn from a barrel covered with a scrap of cloth to keep out leaves and insects. Though you suspect smaller things make it through, you remember hearing someone say the boiling kills anything dangerous. And you choose to believe them because the alternative is thinking about what you've already eaten. A woman in the corner is kneading dough for bread, her hands working in a steady rhythm. The dough is dark, flecked with coarse grains, and smells faintly sour. She explains that it's a mix of whatever flour they can get, rye, barley, sometimes even ground-up chestnuts. The yeast is kept alive in a small jar wrapped in cloth, passed between women so it never dies out. It's the closest thing to communal pet, one they feed daily with a bit of flour and water. The bread it produces is dense and heavy, better for filling the stomach than pleasing the palate. There's an ongoing debate, you learn, about whether it's better to eat the stew first and save the bread for later, or to soak the bread in the stew so it softens. The former means you get the bread dry, a rare treat in this damp climate. The latter means you can pretend, for a few bites at least, that the bread is fresh and the stew richer than it is. Historians still argue whether such habits in wartime were about taste or just practicality, though here it's clearly about survival. Every now and then, someone produces a surprise ingredient. Today, it's a handful of dried herbs pulled from a pocket, smelling faintly of summer. They're crumbled into the pot with a kind of ceremony, everyone leaning in to catch the first shift in the aroma. Another woman adds a splash of vinegar from a bottle with no label, the liquid cloudy and sharp. These small additions make the meal feel less like fuel and more like food, even if only for the first few bites. Flies are a constant nuisance, even in the cold. They land on the rim of the pot, on the handles of spoons, on anything left unattended for more than a heartbeat. The women wave them away without thought, the motion as automatic as breathing. Sometimes a cloth is draped over the pot when it's not being stirred, but the cloth itself is far from clean, carrying the same faint, greasy scent as the aprons. You notice that no one eats alone here. Even when the portions are meager, bowls are passed, bites shared, and cups swapped without a second thought. Illness is a risk they all live with, but the comfort of shared food seems worth it. You imagine this habit predates the war farm tables, village gatherings, families eating from the same dish. Here, it's as much about morale as it is about nutrition. In one corner, a woman is carefully scraping the blackened crust from the bottom of a pot. The bits are set aside in a small tin. Later, they'll be crumbled into porridge or soup for extra flavor. You can't help but think of the burnt edges of lasagna at home, except here it's less a guilty pleasure and more a necessary thrift. Someone jokes that if you scrape enough pots, you can make a whole meal from the crusts alone, and the laughter that follows is real, even if the joke cuts close to truth. The day's work in the mess area never really ends. As soon as one meal is done, preparations for the next begin. Firewood has to be collected, water fetched, ingredients sorted and stretched. The women rotate duties, but everyone knows the routines by heart. You hear them humming softly as they work, not songs you recognize, but lilting, repetitive melodies that match the slow pace of peeling, stirring, kneading. By late afternoon, the smell of the stew has deepened, the air thick with it. The pot is ladled out into bowls, the bread sliced into uneven hunks. The portions are small, but no one complains out loud. You sit with them, the wooden bench cold under you, and take your first bite. The stew is salty The meat's stringy, but there's warmth in it, and that's enough. Around you, the women eat quickly, heads bent, spoons scraping the last drops from the bottom of their bowls. When the meal is over, cleanup is brisk, but hardly thorough. Bowls are rinsed in the same cloudy water from earlier, spoons wiped with a rag, and everything stacked haphazardly until the next use. The fire is banked, its embers left to smolder, ready to be coaxed back to life when needed. You realize that the mess area isn't just a place to eat, it's a constant hub of motion, a point of connection in the slow, grinding days. As you leave, the smell of stew clings to your clothes, mingling with the powder from the delousing station. You think about how these scents, sharp, smoky, earthy, would be unremarkable here, but alien back home. The women settle back into their work, talking quietly, hands always busy. You walk away with the image of them bent over their tasks, each movement part of an unbroken cycle of cooking, cleaning, and preparing. The quiet rhythm of survival in a place where hygiene is a luxury, and a warm meal is both a comfort and a calculated risk. You follow the faint clatter of metal on wood, the dull scrape of something being dragged across a floor, until you reach the washing area. It is not the neat laundry space of any domestic memory. Here, it's a series of tubs and barrels set against a sagging canvas wall. The ground beneath them churned into a patchwork of mud and frozen puddles. The air smells faintly of lye soap, sharp and alkaline. But underneath, it lies the unmistakable damp mildew scent of clothing that will never truly dry. A woman stands with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms raw and pink from the cold water. She dunks a shirt into a barrel, rubs it hard against a washboard, then wrings it out with a practiced twist. Her hands are cracked, the skin flaking, but she works methodically, her face blank with concentration. Nearby, another woman pours boiling water from a dented kettle into a tub, steam rising in a sudden cloud. The hot water is rationed carefully, used first for the dirtiest garments, or for anything suspected of harboring lice, or worse. Piles of laundry sit in varying states of cleanliness. Some are stiff and gray from repeated washings in poor water. Others are so stained that no amount of scrubbing will change their color. Underwear, socks, blouses, skirts, they are all mended so many times that the stitching forms a second fabric over the original. A long wool skirt hangs over a rope, dripping steadily into the mud, the hem frayed into threads that sway in the breeze. There's a rhythm to the work here. Soak, scrub, rinse, wring, hang. The women fall into it naturally, passing items back and forth, trading tools without a word. A chipped enamel basin changes hands, a bar of soap, worn thin and translucent, is sliced into slivers, so each person has a piece. The water in the tubs darkens quickly, and you see one woman hesitate before plunging a once white shirt into it, the fabric absorbing the murky brown as if resigning itself to defeat. Conversation is sparse. The work demands enough attention to keep hands busy, but the cold and the sheer repetitiveness dull the urge to talk. When someone does speak, It's often in short bursts, a comment about the weather, a muttered curse at a stubborn stain, a quick request for a needle or more hot water. The sounds of the place are muted but constant. The slosh of water, the creak of rope under wet weight, the occasional snap as a clothespin gives way and drops its burden into the mud. The drying lines are crowded with garments, each piece pegged closely to the next. The wind tugs at them, twisting them into knots, or flapping them hard enough to slap against one another. Sometimes they freeze before they can dry, turning stiff as boards, and must be brought back inside to thaw before the process can continue. You see one woman take down a half-frozen pair of stockings, bend them gently over her knee until they soften enough to fold, and tuck them under her arm for warmth. On the far side of the area, a smaller, more private line holds undergarments and menstrual cloths. They are washed quickly, discreetly, and often in hotter water if it can be spared. Here, privacy is not about modesty so much as avoiding unnecessary comment. You catch the faint scent of vinegar in one tub, used to clean and neutralize. It cuts through the soap smell and makes your eyes sting for a moment. There's an almost military efficiency to the sorting of clothing. A bundle of socks is carried to a corner where a woman sits with a tin of darning needles, patching heels and toes with yarn pulled from worn-out garments. Another woman mends a shirt, her stitches so small they're nearly invisible, her hands moving without pause, even as she glances toward the boiling kettle to see if it's ready for the next batch. Everything here is repurposed. Old blankets are cut into shawls, torn coats patched with mismatched fabric, frayed cuffs, bound with strips of cloth to keep the cold from seeping in. A small child, no more than 6, appears at the edge of the washing area, carrying a basket nearly as large as herself. She sets it down with a grunt, revealing a heap of clothes so filthy they seem to carry their own cloud of dust. One of the women waves her away gently, telling her to fetch more firewood for the kettle. The child obeys, her boots squelching in the mud, but not before peeking curiously into one of the tubs and wrinkling her nose at the smell. Steam curls upward from the largest tub, where a blanket is being boiled. This is the closest thing to sterilization they can manage, and it's used for items suspected of carrying infestation. The process is long, the blanket stirred now, and then with a stick, the water eventually poured out into the mud where it steams briefly before sinking away. The blanket, sodden and heavy, takes 2 women to lift. They haul it to the line together, their boots slipping, their breath coming in visible puffs in the cold air. Drying clothes is as much an exercise in patience as in work. Some garments will hang for days before they are wearable, and even then, they may carry the faint chill of dampness. In bad weather, everything is brought indoors and hung from rafters or strung across sleeping spaces, turning the air thick with the scent of wet wool and soap. The mingling of these smells with human sweat, cooking fires, and the ever-present background of mildew is something you imagine will cling to the memory of this place forever. Despite the hardships, there are small acts of care here. A shirt is pressed as flat as possible by hand before being hung. A scarf is brushed with a stiff bristle to remove dried mud. Someone shakes out a skirt until it flares briefly, releasing a puff of dust that glitters in a shaft of light before settling again. These gestures take time, and time is precious, but they are done anyway, perhaps as a quiet insistence that dignity still has a place here. Once a week, sometimes less, sometimes more depending on supplies, soap is rationed. It arrives in rough, uneven blocks, sometimes scented faintly with something floral, other times smelling only of fat and ash. The women slice it carefully, each piece weighed or measured by eye to ensure fairness. On the days when scented soap appears, the mood lifts noticeably, even if the scent is faint and fleeting. It is enough to remind them of a world outside the mud and cold, a world where clean linen and fragrant baths were once possible. By late afternoon, the washing slows. The tubs are emptied, the water running in thin, dirty streams into the ground. The washboards are propped against the wall, the soap scraps wrapped and tucked away. The women rub their hands together, trying to coax warmth back into their stiff fingers. Some flex their wrists or shake their arms, easing the ache from hours of wringing and scrubbing. As you watch them disperse, baskets of damp laundry balanced on hips or carried in the crook of an arm, you realize that cleanliness here is never absolute. It's only ever partial, temporary. Dirt will return, stains will deepen, odors will creep back in. But the work continues regardless, because it is less about the final result and more about the act itself, about pushing back against the slow erosion of body and spirit. You stand for a moment longer, the cold seeping through your boots, the scent of lye sharp in your nose. Somewhere behind you, someone laughs, a short, surprised sound quickly swallowed by the wind. You turn toward it, and the washing area is left behind, its tubs and lines swaying gently in the breeze, the day's labor hanging there in rows, damp and heavy, waiting for whatever tomorrow will bring. Night draws in without ceremony, the gray light dimming until the camp is wrapped in a kind of shadow that doesn't quite belong to evening and doesn't quite belong to night either. Lamps are lit here and there, their glow muffled by soot-streaked glass and the faint haze of smoke drifting from the cook fires. The ground is uneven beneath your feet, hardened in some places, slick in others, and every step carries a crunch or a soft squelch that seems to echo louder now that most of the day's work has fallen quiet. Inside one of the larger tents, the air is warmer, but thick with the smell of damp wool, bodies, and something simmering in a pot that may have begun life as soup, but has now crossed into the realm of mystery stew. Women sit in a loose circle around the pot, their skirts and coats spread out to dry in the heat. Some work with their hands, even now mending, knitting, darning, while others simply sit, watching the steam curl upward in slow ribbons. A few have their boots off, their feet wrapped in strips of cloth to keep the cold from setting in too deep. The talk here is quiet and comes in fits and starts, sometimes drifting into silence for several minutes before someone speaks again. One woman recounts a story from home, something about a neighbor's pig that escaped into a cabbage patch. Another shares a memory of her mother's bread, how the smell filled the kitchen, how the crust cracked just so when she broke it open. These memories are told without flourish, almost like they are recited to themselves rather than to the group. Small anchors dropped into the current to keep them from drifting too far away from who they were before all of this. You notice a younger girl, perhaps no more than 17, sitting with a small mirror in her lap. She holds it at different angles to catch the lamplight, running a comb through her hair slowly, as though measuring her patience strand by strand. Her hair is tangled but clean enough, and she smooths it back into a braid that she secures with a length of cloth. The act seems to give her a measure of calm. When she finishes, she exhales, as though she's been holding her breath the entire time. The pot in the center is ladled into tin cups and bowls, the liquid thin but warm, the vegetables soft enough to mash with a spoon. Bread, when it appears, is rationed in slices so small you can eat one in 2 bites. No one complains, it's habit by now, but you can see the way hands linger near their bowls even after they're empty, as if hoping something more might appear in them. The meal is eaten quickly, partly because the food cools fast in the drafty space, and partly because eating is one of the few moments when the body is certain of its purpose. Outside, a wind rises, rattling the tent flaps and sending a few loose scraps of paper skittering across the ground. Somewhere to the east, a distant thump reverberates, too far to shake the earth here, but close enough to stir a ripple of silence among those who hear it. No one moves, no one speaks, until the sound fades and the usual noises of the camp creep back in. A cough, the creak of leather, the slow drip of water from a hanging pot. You follow a woman out into the night, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She carries a bucket in one hand and a lantern in the other, her boots leaving deep impressions in the soft ground. She stops at a water barrel, dips the bucket in, and then turns toward a smaller tent near the edge of camp. Inside, the air is colder, sharper, and the smell is tinged with something medicinal. Here, those who are ill rest on cots lined up close together, blankets pulled up to their chins. The woman moves among them quietly, filling tin cups from the bucket, murmuring a few words to each as she passes. Some drink, others turn their faces away. One young man, too young really to be here at all, takes the cup with both hands and sips slowly, as if every swallow is an effort. She adjusts blankets, tucks stray edges under thin bodies, wipes a brow with the hem of her sleeve. There's a rhythm to her movements, like the rhythm of washing earlier in the day, but here it's slower, measured, deliberate. When she finishes, she steps outside and sets the empty bucket down, her breath clouding in the lantern light. She does not look at you, but there's something in the way her shoulders square before she walks back toward the main tents that makes you think she cannot afford to. The camp quiets further as the night deepens. Somewhere, a harmonica begins to play, a thin, wavering tune that winds through the air like smoke. It's joined after a while by a low humming, then a voice singing softly in a language you don't recognize. The song is not loud enough to be called performance, more like someone talking to themselves in music, the words shaped more by memory than by melody. You pass by a row of sleeping quarters. The tent flaps half open, revealing shadows of people lying close together for warmth. Boots are stacked by the entrances, some upright, others collapsed under their own damp weight. A pair of stockings hangs from a tent pole, stiff as if they'd been dipped in plaster. Inside, the breathing is steady, but never quite deep. Sleep here is light, broken easily by noise or dream. At the far end of the camp, near the low wooden fence that marks its boundary, a small fire burns. Two women sit beside it, one with a notebook on her knee, the other with a length of cloth she is hemming. The notebook is filled with careful lines of writing, the kind that seems meant for keeping rather than sharing. Every so often, the woman looks up from it to gaze at the fire, her lips moving slightly as if she's testing the words she's just written. The other woman works without looking up, her needle darting in and out of the fabric, the stitches neat and small despite the dim light. Beyond them, the land stretches into darkness, the horizon hidden. The only movement is the flicker of the fire and the shifting shadows it casts. It's here, at the edge of things, that the night feels widest, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the canvas behind you. The women work on, unhurried, as if the act itself is reason enough to stay awake. Eventually, the harmonica stops. The lanterns inside the tents are dimmed one by one until only a few remain, their light small and soft against the vast dark. You find yourself walking slower, your breath loud in your own ears, the ground beneath you crunching with frost where the mud has hardened in the cold. Somewhere nearby, a rat scurries, its claws scratching against a wooden crate before it disappears into the shadows. The camp is not asleep. Not really. It never truly sleeps. But it has shifted into a state of waiting. Waiting for morning, waiting for news, waiting for whatever comes next. You feel the weight of that waiting in your own chest as you stop to look back at the glow of the few remaining fires, the thin curls of smoke rising into the cold air, vanishing into the night without a trace. The first hints of morning come not with light, but with sound, the creak of boots on frozen ground, the metallic clink of pots being moved, the low murmur of voices still thick with sleep. The air is sharp, biting against any skin left uncovered, and each exhale emerges in a pale cloud that hangs briefly before vanishing. Somewhere, a kettle rattles faintly as the water inside it begins to stir toward a boil. The smell of wood smoke is heavier now, clinging to everything, seeping into the fibers of clothes and hair, until it feels like it has always been there. People emerge from the tents slowly, shoulders hunched, scarves pulled high. Some blink against the dim, gray light as though it's too bright after the darkness, even though the sun has yet to truly rise. The ground crunches underfoot, crusted with frost that will turn to mud once the day warms, but for now holds firm. A few figures bend over the water barrels, breaking the thin film of ice across the top before dipping tin mugs in. The water is cold enough to sting the teeth, but they drink quickly anyway, their eyes darting toward the kettles where the promise of warmth waits. A woman crouches beside a fire, her gloved hands holding a pan over the flames. Inside, scraps of bread are being toasted, the edges blackening in places. She works quickly, flipping each piece before the heat can scorch it entirely. The smell draws a small group closer, their breaths mingling in the air, hands extended toward the fire more for the warmth than the food. A few trade quiet words about the weather, about a letter someone hopes will arrive today, but most just stand silently, waiting. Nearby, a man hauls a crate from one tent to another, his boots slipping slightly on the frost. The crate is marked with faded letters, its corners reinforced with rusted metal. When he sets it down, the sound is a dull thud that seems to carry through the stillness. Two others join him, prying the lid open with the handle of a spoon bent, almost flat. Inside are tins, dented but intact, their labels smudged to the point of being unreadable. They divide them quickly, some going straight to the cooking fires, others set aside for later. The light strengthens slowly, the world shifting from gray to the faintest blue. Shadows begin to stretch across the ground, long and thin, cast by the wooden poles and tent lines. In the distance, a cart approaches, its wheels crunching over the frozen earth. The horse pulling it moves at a steady pace, its breath rising in great puffs, its mane stiff with frost. The driver sits hunched forward, a blanket draped over his shoulders, one gloved hand holding the reins loosely. The cart's arrival draws attention. Anything from the outside does. And a few people drift toward it, curiosity tempered by caution. When the cart stops, the driver climbs down slowly, stretching his back before pulling back the covering over the cargo. Inside are sacks of flour, a few bundles wrapped in cloth, and a small stack of firewood. The wood draws more interest than the flour. Fuel is harder to come by here than food, and the nights still cut through the tents like knives. The bundles are claimed by those who know to look for them. Personal deliveries, letters, the occasional package from home. One woman unwraps a bundle to find a length of fabric deep blue with a faint pattern woven through it. She runs it through her fingers, the corners of her mouth lifting almost imperceptibly. Another opens a letter, reading quickly, her eyes moving faster than her lips can form the words. She folds it twice, tucks it into her coat, and walks away without a word. The frost begins to soften as the sun finally breaches the horizon. It's light weak, but enough to set the air shimmering faintly. Work begins in earnest now. Fires are stoked higher, water fetched, clothes hung where the meager sun can reach them. A group gathers near the larger tent, sorting through piles of laundry that had been left to dry overnight. Some pieces are stiff as boards, others merely damp. They shake them out, fold them roughly, and stack them in uneven piles. One woman finds a sleeve still lined with mud and mutters under her breath, dropping it into a bucket for rewashing. By mid-morning, the camp hums with movement. A pair of women sit cross-legged on the ground, repairing a canvas flap that is torn along one seam. The needle passes through the material with difficulty, each pull requiring a firm tug. The wind flaps the loose edge, making the work awkward, but they persist without comment. Children too few to be loud, too many to be invisible, wander between the tents, carrying small tasks from one end of the camp to the other. One boy, no older than 8, clutches a bundle of kindling to his chest, his small boots leaving shallow prints in the softening ground. The midday meal is little more than bread and thin broth, but it is hot, and that matters. People gather in loose circles, sitting on crates, overturned buckets, or directly on the ground. Steam rises from the bowls, curling upward into the cold air. The bread is torn into pieces and dipped into the broth, softening it before it is eaten. Conversation is sparse, and when it does happen, it is about the smallest of things: a bird spotted on the fence, the way the clouds are moving, a new hole in someone's coat. It is as though larger topics would take up too much space, crowding out the fragile quiet that allows the food to be eaten in peace. After the meal, the work shifts again. Those tending to the sick move among their charges, carrying buckets of water, fresh bandages, and small portions of food. The sick room is warmer now, the fires outside feeding its heat, but the air is still heavy with the smell of medicine and the faint sweetness of decay. A woman sits by one cot, spooning broth into the mouth of an older man who swallows without opening his eyes. Another checks the bandage on a young woman's arm, frowning at the way the cloth has stained through. She replaces it quickly, her fingers deft despite the cold. Outside, the repairs continue, boots resoled with scraps of leather, tent lines retied, crates patched where the wood has splintered. The sun climbs higher, but never warms enough to melt the ice that lingers in shadowed places. The wind has shifted, carrying with it the faint, distant sound of something that might be gunfire or might be nothing at all. People pause when they hear it, heads tilting, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. When it fades, they return to their tasks, movements a little quicker than before. As the afternoon wears on, the light begins to change again, turning from the pale glare of midday to the softer gold of evening. Shadows grow long, and the temperature begins to drop once more. Fires are built higher, kettles filled, and the smell of boiling vegetables spreads through the camp. Children are called back from wherever they've been playing, their voices carrying faintly as they run between the tents. Someone begins to sing, low at first, then louder as others join in. The song is simple, a tune that can be carried without effort, and it threads through the camp like a shared breath. When the meal comes, it is more plentiful than midday, with thicker broth and more bread. People eat a little slower, talking more, the day's work easing from their shoulders. The firelight paints faces in warm tones, the shadows deepening the lines around eyes and mouths. Someone passes around a small tin of something sweet, jam perhaps, or honey, and each person takes only enough to coat the edge of their bread. The sweetness draws small, quiet smiles, the kind that do not need to be spoken about. Night settles in again, the cold creeping back into the air. Lanterns are lit, the tents closed against the wind. The camp quiets, though not completely. There are still those who work into the night, mending clothes, tending the fires, checking on the sick. From somewhere near the edge of camp, the harmonica returns, its tune slower tonight, the notes stretching out into the dark. The sound carries, soft but steady, until it becomes part of the night itself, a thread holding the silence together. You walk once more to the far edge of the camp, where the fire burns lower than the others. The two women are there again, the notebook and the sewing still in their laps. The pages are more filled now, the stitches farther along. They do not look up when you pass, but there is a quiet acknowledgement in the way their hands continue to move, steady and sure. Beyond them, the land disappears into darkness, the night vast and indifferent. And yet here, within the small circle of light and breath, there is something that holds. The wind shifted during the night, and by morning it carries a sharper edge, the kind that cuts straight through the seams of coats, no matter how tightly they're fastened. The fires have burned down to low embers, and the smoke hangs heavy in the air, refusing to rise in the damp chill. Before the sun even hints at the horizon, the first stirrings begin, boots scraping on frozen soil, the soft thump of bodies moving inside tents as blankets are folded and belongings rearranged. A kettle clatters against a pot, the sound oddly loud in the muffled gray. Somewhere, a cough echoes, dry and insistent, and then again, closer. The ground is harder this morning, the frost thicker, the surface glittering faintly when a lantern passes over it. A few figures are already moving toward the water barrels, breaking ice with the ends of shovels. The water sloshes darkly in the dim light, and the hands that dip into it come away red with cold. Breath fogs the air so thickly it looks like steam rising from the people themselves. A boy carries an armful of kindling to one of the central fires, his small frame tilting under the weight. He drops it too quickly, scattering sticks that have to be gathered again before the flames can be coaxed higher. When the light finally begins to grow, it is weak, filtered through a haze that blurs the edges of the camp. Shadows cling close to the tents, and the colors of the world are muted brown, gray, and the dull blue of worn cloth. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, a lone crow calls, the sound cracking through the stillness. The smell of something boiling drifts through the air, thin and faintly metallic, but enough to draw a few people closer to the larger fire. A man sits near the flames, hunched over a tin plate that he holds between his knees. His fingers tear at a piece of bread, dipping it into a shallow puddle of broth before eating. Across from him, a woman stirs a pot with slow, even movements, her eyes half-lidded as though she's somewhere else entirely. Around them, others move in silence, their faces turned toward the warmth, their bodies angled to catch as much heat as possible. By mid-morning, the haze begins to lift, revealing a sky the color of pale tin. The wind hasn't let up, and it drives everyone to work faster, fetching water, stacking wood, checking the ropes that hold the tents against the gusts. One tent's flap has torn loose, and is snapping wildly. Two people wrestle with it, their gloves fumbling over the knots until they manage to secure it again. The sound dies down, but the wind keeps pushing, probing for another weakness. A cart arrives from the north, its wheels caked with a crust of ice and mud. The driver wears a scarf wrapped high over his face, only his eyes visible. He doesn't speak as he climbs down, moving to the back to uncover the load. There's less than last time, 3 sacks of something grain-like, a few bundles wrapped in oiled cloth, and a crate that rattles when lifted. The bundles are claimed quickly, hands lingering on the knots as if to make sure they're real. The crate is pried open, with a crowbar revealing glass jars lined in straw, their contents pale and thick. Someone says it's lard. Someone else says it doesn't matter what it is, it will stretch the food a little farther. Children hover nearby, watching with wide eyes as the jars are carried toward the main tent. One girl reaches out to touch the straw inside the crate, her fingers brushing it lightly before she pulls back, glancing around as if she's done something she shouldn't. She slips away before anyone can notice, her boots crunching softly over the frost. The day's tasks pull people in different directions. Some move toward the edge of camp, where a low fence has been patched together from whatever could be found: branches, old boards, strips of canvas. Beyond it, the land dips slightly, the grass brittle and brown under the weight of the frost. A few figures pick their way carefully down the slope, carrying baskets and sacks. They return an hour later with small bundles of dead grass, a few twigs, and one triumphant bundle of something green enough to almost be fresh. The sick tent, the air is thick and close, the warmth from the stoves battling the smell of damp cloth and boiled herbs. A man lies propped against a pile of blankets, his breath shallow but even. A woman at his side dabs his forehead with a rag, murmuring something too low to hear. At the far end, a young boy sleeps curled tightly on his side, his small frame barely making a dent in the cot. His blanket has slipped to the floor, and someone gently pulls it back over him, tucking it in at the edges. Outside, the sound of metal striking metal rings out as someone repairs a cooking pot. Sparks jump briefly in the cold air, vanishing before they touch the ground. The repaired pot is tested immediately, filled with water, and set over a low flame. Around it, people gather to warm their hands, rubbing them together as the steam begins to rise. The midday meal is simple flatbread, and a stew so thin it's almost clear, but it's hot, and no one lingers before eating. Bread is torn into strips and dunked until it softens enough to chew. A few trade portions, one giving away bread in exchange for more broth, another slipping their stew to a child and taking the child's bread in return. The wind flutters the edges of coats and scarves, carrying away the steam as fast as it can rise. After the meal, a few men head out beyond the fence, their strides long and deliberate. They carry no tools, no sacks, just themselves and the weight of something unspoken. They don't look back. The rest of the camp seems to shrink in their absence, the spaces between the fires feeling wider, the quiet settling heavier. Work continues because it must. The sewing tent is crowded, women sitting shoulder to shoulder as they mend tiers in coats, patch blankets, and stitch together scraps into something resembling gloves. The needles flash briefly in the light before disappearing into the cloth again. Conversation here is more frequent, but it's still low, like the murmur of a river under ice. Every so often, someone laughs quietly, the sound startling but not unwelcome. The sky begins to cloud over in the late afternoon, the light turning flat and dim. Snow threatens in the air, though none has fallen yet. The wind sharpens further, rattling the tent poles and snapping the flags of fabric that mark certain corners of the camp. Fires are stoked higher, their smoke rising straight up before being snatched away. Pots are pulled close to the heat, lids clattering softly as they shift. When evening comes, it comes quickly, the temperature dropping with the light. The snow begins as a fine dust, barely visible except where it catches in the firelight. It settles on coats, on hats, melting instantly against skin, but clinging to cloth. The ground begins to whiten in patches, the frost deepening beneath it. The evening meal is eaten faster than usual, the cold making it hard to linger. People stand closer to the fires now, bowls held in both hands, steam rising into their faces. The snow thickens, the flakes growing larger, drifting slowly but steadily down. Children stick out their tongues to catch them, their laughter brief but bright before being swallowed by the dark. By the time the fires burn low, the ground is covered in a thin layer of white. Footsteps crunch softly, and the light from the lanterns glows faintly against the snow. In the sewing tent, work continues under the flicker of a single lamp, the women leaning close to see their stitches. In the sick tent, the stoves burn hotter, the blankets piled higher. The harmonica plays again tonight, its notes slow and winding, threading through the sound of the wind outside. It's joined briefly by a low hum, then a voice singing something without words, just a rise and fall that blends with the music. The snow keeps falling, steady and silent, until the camp feels like it has been wrapped in something soft enough to almost forget the cold. At the far edge, the two women sit again, one with her notebook, the other with her sewing. The notebook is nearly half filled now, the pages bending under the weight of ink. The stitches in the cloth have grown more intricate, the thread looping in patterns that catch the dim light. They work without speaking, the quiet between them as steady as the snowfall. Beyond them, the night stretches, the snow covering the ground in a slow, even sheet, hiding everything except what the firelight can reach. By morning, the snow has stopped, leaving the camp muffled under a crust of white that crunches sharply with every step. The fires have to be coaxed back to life from the embers, the damp wood sputtering and smoking before it catches. Breath hangs thick in the air, and every movement feels slower, weighed down by the cold. A few children are already out, their tracks crisscrossing between the tents in winding, careless paths. They carry small bundles of sticks or kindling, each trip bringing a little more fuel to the central fire. The light is thin, with the sun somewhere behind a sheet of pale gray clouds. A man crouches near the edge of the camp, scraping snow away from a pile of stones to reveal the entrance to a small pit. Inside are a few stored roots and vegetables, packed in straw. He checks each one carefully, brushing away frost and discarding anything that's gone soft. The usable ones are carried back toward the main fire, where a pot is already hanging from an iron hook, its contents just beginning to bubble. The ground under the snow is frozen hard, making every step ring faintly. A woman walks along the fence line, her scarf pulled up to her eyes, carrying a lantern despite the daylight. She stops every few yards to check the posts, pressing against them to make sure they hold. One section leans inward slightly, and she pulls it back into place, packing snow around the base. When she's finished, she keeps going without a word, her lantern swinging gently at her side. The sick tent is quieter this morning. The boy who had been curled up on his side now lies with one arm flung across his blanket, his breathing still shallow but less strained. A man at the far end sits upright, wrapped in so many layers he looks broader than he is, staring at nothing in particular. The woman tending the stoves hums softly, her voice low and steady. The sound blends with the faint hiss of steam rising from the pots, the air heavy with the smell of boiled herbs. At the edge of the camp, the two men who left the day before have not returned. Their absence is noted in glances rather than words. A few people look toward the northern path when they pass by, but no one lingers there for long. Instead, the work of the day presses forward, fetching water, repairing torn seams, breaking apart larger logs for the fires. A cart arrives from the east this time, pulled by a tired-looking horse whose breath puffs in great clouds. The driver is bundled heavily, his hands raw and red where they grip the reins. His load is modest: a few sacks of grain, some firewood, a stack of thin blankets rolled tightly. The wood is unloaded first, stacked near the central fire to dry. The blankets are given to those who need them most: the sick, the very old, the youngest children. The grain is measured carefully, each portion recorded before it's carried away. The snow begins again in the early afternoon, light at first, the flakes drifting lazily before the wind picks up and drives them faster. People move more quickly now, gathering what they need before visibility worsens. The clouds press lower, flattening the light until it's hard to tell the time. The wind whistles through the gaps between tents, tugging at the ropes, making the canvas ripple and strain. In the sewing tent, the women work without pause. The table in the center is covered in scraps of fabric, spools of thread, and a few pairs of shears dulled from use. A girl no older than 12 sits at one end, carefully stitching the edge of a glove. Her stitches are uneven, but she works with quiet determination, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth. Across from her, an older woman mends a large tear in a blanket, the needle flashing in and out of the thick fabric. The rhythm of their work is steady, almost soothing, the sound of the wind outside muted by the walls of the tent. The central fire burns higher as the day fades. People stand close to it, their shadows long on the snow. The stew for the evening is thicker than usual, thanks to the roots recovered from the pit, and the smell draws nearly everyone in. Bowls are filled and refilled until the pot is nearly empty, the last bits scraped from the bottom. Children press close to their parents, their cheeks flushed from the heat and the cold all at once. As darkness falls, the wind grows harsher. The snow whirls in tight spirals, clinging to clothing and hair, melting in brief rivulets that freeze almost instantly. Lanterns are lit around the camp, their light flickering in the gusts. A few people remain outside, stamping their feet and talking in low voices, but most retreat into the tents where the stoves offer a little warmth. In the sick tent, the boy stirs for the first time all day, his eyes half opening before slipping closed again. The woman at his side adjusts his blanket, her fingers brushing his hair back from his forehead. She glances toward the stove, then back at him, as though weighing whether to move. In the end, she stays where she is, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The harmonica plays again tonight, though the sound is faint against the wind. It drifts from one of the smaller fires, where 3 people sit close together, their faces hidden in shadow. The notes are slow and deliberate, each one seeming to linger longer than it should. No one speaks until the song ends, and even then, the voices are quiet, carried away almost immediately by the gusts. By the time the fires burn low, the snow has deepened, covering the earlier tracks so thoroughly that the camp looks untouched. The lanterns glow dimly against the white, their light haloed by the flakes still falling. Inside the tents, the sounds are muffled, soft breathing, the rustle of blankets, the occasional crackle from a stove. The 2 women at the far edge sit together again. The notebook is open on one's lap, the pen moving slowly across the page. The other works a needle through a square of fabric, the pattern on it intricate now, a weaving of lines and curves that seem to catch the light differently depending on the angle. They don't look up when the wind shakes the tent, or when a gust sends a flurry of snow against the canvas. The steady scratch of pen and thread is enough to fill the quiet between them. Far beyond the fence, the land stretches out into white emptiness. The snow hides the path north, the one the 2 men took, until it's nothing but a smooth expanse under the low sky. No footprints remain. The camp, small and flickering against the vastness, holds its heat close as the night deepens.